Hey, what's happening, people? I'm back with a location guide for Vane. Now, you might be wondering why I'm covering Vane when the Cannibal Plains won the poll last week. Well, I'm sorry to say that this channel is not a democracy. Unless, of course, you mean by democracy that I elected myself to run the channel for life, in which case, then yes, we are a democracy. Seriously, though, I got bored going to dangerous areas with my end game squad. Life in Kenshi can only get so difficult once you have Cyberbeep and Catlon doing the slicing and dicing. So, most of the clips in this guide will be with my new team. They are ill-equipped, poorly trained, and terrified. After all, what's a game of Kenshi without risking life and limb on a daily basis? With this new team, we stopped by Vane to set up shop before heading to the Cannibal Plains, so I thought, why not? Let's make a guide on Vane. The wonderful world of Vane is on the east coast of the map, wedged between Dreg and the Sten Desert. The acidic river which extends through Vane also runs close to the border zone and Ocaran's Gulf. Vane's topography is unlike any other area. It features steep ridges on the edge of the region, with the land gradually descending into the main river. Accompanying the ebb and flow of the river is also a dense amount of trees and shrubs. These obstruct an adventurer's vision, and caution is to be advised when traveling, lest you be ambushed by the very active wildlife. While the rain in this zone appears to be acidic, it will not damage characters. The river, however, is definitely acidic and will burn characters who are not skeletons or hivers. If you do travel along the river in Vane, you're liable to encounter strange huts occupied by the Western Hive. These hive villages are fitted with both a robotic shop and a general store. As long as you keep the peace and do not act out, these villages are safe havens for those seeking shelter. If you do decide to settle in Vane, you'll have a good amount of natural resources to work with. As far as fertility, Vane has a fascinating fertility distribution, with 50% arid, 50% green, and 20% swamp, with an overall fertility of 75%. This makes Vane quite accommodating for all crops except for riceweed. And although 50% arid and 50% green fertility is not quite as good as some other regions, practically speaking, I would say Vane's fertility is a huge plus. For water and stone, you have a pretty favorable distribution. There will be certain areas that have as much as you'll need. For water in particular, you'll want to settle near the river that runs through Vane or on the coast. Another strength that Vane has is its bountiful amount of copper. There are highly visible orangish copper veins all over, and the copper is of a good quality. This is important for early in the game where mining copper is not a bad source of income. The only real sticking point in Vane is its iron. Iron veins can generally only be occupied by one character at a time, and it can be difficult to find a location that's flat enough and has both iron and copper. I'll touch on how you can address the lack of iron in Vane later. Before I dive into the different kinds of wildlife you'll see in Vane, I want to mention that the Holy Nation outlaws do travel through Vane. They aren't that strong, and they've usually been knocked out by big things or a gorilla when you do see them, but if you're hostile towards their faction, just be aware that they can be seen from time to time in Vane. Now, moving on to perhaps Vane's biggest strength. It has an excellent animal spawn roster, most of which have a high loot value. For neutral animals, you have Garu and Wild Bull. Wild bulls are very strong and can spawn in large numbers, but their loot value is superb. If you're unsure if you can handle a group of wild bull, it's best not to attack. They do have a high amount of damage, and unless you're able to get help from a nearby high village, it's not worth the risk. As for Garu, they are less risky when compared to wild bulls, but they're no pushover. You may be able to aggro just a couple of them from a passing group, and that's always nice, but be careful, as their run speed is quite high, so they will be able to chase you down if your characters run. For hostile wildlife in Vane, you'll see beak things, gorillas, and bone dogs. Gorillos have a strong attack value and tanky HP, but they are not considered to be very dangerous due to how slow they are. They also tend to be alone, which mitigates their overall threat level. Among all the different animals in Vane, gorillas will likely be the first that you try to take down alone without the help of a hive village. Although it's rare to see them, bone dogs can definitely spawn in Vane, particularly in the southern portion and the eastern portion. My overall feeling is that you just shouldn't attack them, even if you can win. Their loot value is very low, and they do a high amount of damage. I just don't think that the trade is good. With their low HP too, it's not like you're giving up a lot of experience to fight them, so I would just leave them alone. Now with beak things, you don't get to choose to leave them alone, because they are so fast. As opposed to in other regions, beak things in Vane are particularly nasty because there is no such thing as a homeless spawn of beak things. What that will mean is that if you see beak things, that means there is an associated beak thing nest somewhere nearby. With the amount of trees in Vane, I sometimes feel like I'm playing a horror game, waiting for the next beak thing jump scare. But for those brave souls who are willing to square up against a beak thing nest, the reward for looting beak thing eggs is considerable. Moving on to some other considerations for Vane, I would say that the hive villages are one of the region's greatest strengths. With these villages, you have a well-defended area where you can retreat when in danger, such as being chased down by beak things, and the village has shops where you can sell goods. On top of all this, the vendors in high villages will sell iron plates and building materials, so it's reasonable to offset the lack of iron in Vane by buying iron plates directly. Other perks of high villages include low-cost prosthetics, a source for books, food, medical supplies, and they even have skeleton repair beds. Honestly, I don't think it's possible to overstate how helpful high villages are. One way to look at it is that high villages are similar to tech hunter way stations. And imagine being close to multiple way stations at the same time. And that's pretty much comparable to what living in Vane is like. You have protection from a neutral faction, a place to sell things that you produce at your base, and the ability to buy magical lanterns. It's a pretty good deal. The other big perk for Vane is the amount of hide that you'll get from the local wildlife. Hide sells for a pretty good price as is, and you have the option to turn it into leather and then make leather armor with that hide. I think I've crafted leather armor in pretty much every single one of my playthroughs because it is such a good moneymaker, and the armor that you can make on your own is pretty decent up until the point where you can buy or loot heavy armor that's of a higher quality. On a final note, Vane's biggest weakness, which is the lack of iron deposits, can be addressed by buying iron plates from high villages, and as soon as you get the tech for ore drills, the iron problem in Vane is going to be irrelevant. If you'd like suggestions on where to settle in Vane, I can recommend a couple of spots. Honestly, I was blown away by all the different possibilities. Primarily, you're going to want to settle either along the coast if you're looking to be further away from the other factions in the game, or you can settle along the river. That also works. It's really hard to pick a favorite among these here, but if I had to pick some favorites, it would be these two that'll light up right here. All in all, I have thoroughly enjoyed my time in Vane. Its unique feel combined with the abundance of resources reminds me of Gut. I suppose the price we pay for living in a good region is the imminent threat of beak thing attacks. I'd like to think that it's worth it though. For the next video, I'll be suffering tremendously in the Cannibal Plains. Feel free to comment below with any thoughts, suggestions, or questions you have about the channel. I will see you next time.